What if the woods you think you know so well harbor secrets that no human should ever stumble upon? What if, one night, a routine hunt takes a horrifying turn? Imagine it, alone, in the heart of the wilderness, where the silence is so deep it almost breathes, where shadows twist between the trees, and darkness lies in wait for those daring enough to enter. The line between hunter and hunted vanishes, and in that dense cover of night, something watches. Something ancient, unseen, yet so close you can feel it. I'm Alex. For as long as I can remember, I've been an avid hunter. It's second nature to me, knowing the terrain, sensing when the air shifts, when an animal's eyes are on me. But there was one trip that changed everything. I went in to conquer the wilderness, thinking I knew every trick in the book, every track in the mud. But I came out knowing the forest hides things that can't be hunted, things I wasn't prepared for. This wasn't just any hunt. This was something else entirely. Tonight, I'm taking you on a journey into those woods, a place where a simple hunt twisted into something I still struggle to understand. It's the kind of story that lingers, like a shadow just out of sight, because sometimes nature isn't just indifferent, it's watching. It started like any other trip, a quiet forest at the edge of the mountains, far from civilization and as untouched as land could get. This was the kind of wilderness people go to lose themselves, away from the hum of life. The kind where you don't just hear silence, you feel it. Mist hung low, settling thick in the valleys, swirling between trees like breath held in the cold air. The canopy stretched high above, and as I walked through the dense undergrowth, I felt that familiar thrill, being alone, truly alone, with nothing but the whispers of the forest around me. But as I went deeper, the feeling changed. That quiet excitement slowly shifted, like a weight pressing down. I told myself it was just nerves. Every hunter feels a sense of respect for the unknown, but there was something else, something heavier, something that made my skin prickle as I set up camp. As night fell, I got my fire going, my small camp becoming a tiny flickering beacon in the vast darkness. And that's when I heard it, a soft rustling, followed by footsteps. I froze, watching the shadows around me, until finally a figure appeared, a local, an older man with a weathered face, worn by years in this harsh landscape. He stood there just out of reach of the firelight, studying me with a gaze that seemed almost pitying. "Not from around here, are you?" he asked, voice low. I nodded, expecting a casual warning about wildlife or the rough terrain. But instead he spoke in hushed tones, his voice carrying a strange urgency, like he was telling me something forbidden. "Strange things happen out here," he said. "Sounds that don't come from any animal. Shadows that disappear when you look at them straight on, and footprints in the ground right behind you where no one should be." I laughed it off, said I'd seen my fair share of strange things. But he didn't laugh back. He just stared and finally muttered, "Not everything out here is meant to be hunted. Some things aren't meant to be found." Then, just as quickly as he appeared, he vanished back into the trees, leaving me with the crackle of the fire and a cold feeling creeping down my spine. Have you ever felt like someone, or something, was watching you, even in a place where no one else should be? It's a strange feeling, unsettling but easy to dismiss. That night, though, alone by the fire, I couldn't shake it. And little did I know, the hunt was only beginning. The next morning, I set out early, rifle in hand, hoping that a new day would brush off the strange encounter from the night before. The forest was alive, birds calling out, leaves rustling in the wind. But as I moved deeper into the trees, the air grew thick and silent, the sounds of life fading like they'd been swallowed up. It was too quiet, that kind of silence that doesn't come naturally. And then the noises started. Branches snapped in the distance, too heavy for any small animal. I glanced around, rifle ready, but saw nothing. Only more silence. I pushed forward, telling myself it was just a deer, maybe another hunter nearby. But then I found signs. Patches of ground disturbed, claw marks raked across trees, and deep impressions in the dirt that weren't from any animal I knew. These signs, they were warnings. Messages written in the language of the forest, like someone or something was leaving its mark. The animals were the next sign that something wasn't right. Usually you catch sight of a predator stalking through the trees or hear the familiar rustling of small creatures darting around. But now, the few animals I saw were running, rushing past me as though something had chased them out, their eyes wild with fear. They weren't looking at me. They were looking at something behind me, something deeper in the shadows. I tried to push the thought out of my mind, but that silence, that empty, unnatural stillness made my skin crawl. I'd never felt fear in the woods before, not like this, and I began to wonder, what could drive even the wild away? It wasn't long before I found the markings. Symbols carved deep into the bark of trees, their shapes foreign, like a language lost to time. They were in clusters, etched with an eerie precision. And around them I found strange items, small rocks stacked in unnatural formations, sticks arranged in patterns that defied reason. It was as if the forest itself was divided, marked by boundaries I wasn't supposed to cross. I took a closer look, feeling that heavy sense of being watched, and I could almost hear a whisper carried by the wind. These symbols, they looked old, weathered, and worn, yet they pulsed with an energy that felt alive. I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being drawn deeper, as if the forest was inviting me in, leading me towards something waiting in its heart. That's when it hit me. I wasn't alone. These signs weren't random. They were warnings, and I had crossed a line. This wasn't my hunt anymore. It was someone else's. And whoever or whatever it was, it had been watching me from the start. The wind howled like a banshee, whipping through the skeletal trees and rattling the cabin windows. A storm, fierce and unforgiving, had descended upon the remote woodland retreat, trapping us within its icy grip. I, along with my friends, Alex, Ben, and Sam, had sought refuge in this secluded cabin, eager to escape the confines of the city and immerse ourselves in the raw, untamed wilderness. The cabin, a relic of a bygone era, creaked and groaned under the relentless assault of the storm. The flickering flames of the fireplace cast dancing shadows on the walls, creating an eerie atmosphere that mirrored the turmoil outside. As the night deepened, the storm reached its crescendo, and an unsettling silence fell over the cabin, broken only by the crackling fire and the distant thunder. It was during this eerie lull that the first disturbance occurred. A blood-curdling scream echoed through the night, piercing the silence and sending chills down our spines. We exchanged terrified glances, our hearts pounding in our chests. Fear, a cold and insidious creature, crept into our hearts, gnawing at our courage. With trembling hands, we armed ourselves with hunting rifles, our only defense against the unknown horrors that lurked in the darkness. We cautiously ventured outside, the wind whipping at our faces and the rain stinging our eyes. The forest, once a place of tranquility, had transformed into a menacing labyrinth, its shadows concealing unspeakable secrets. As we ventured deeper into the woods, the air grew heavy with dread. The ground was littered with strange symbols, their meaning lost to time. A sense of impending doom hung over us, a dark cloud that threatened to consume us whole. The wind howled, carrying with it the distant sound of snarling and growling, a chilling reminder of the danger that lurked in the shadows. Suddenly, a figure emerged from the darkness, its form distorted by the flickering moonlight. It moved with unnatural speed and agility, its movements fluid and predatory. Fear, a primal instinct, surged through us, urging us to flee. But it was too late. The creature lunged, its claws outstretched, its eyes glowing with a malevolent light. In the ensuing chaos, one of our friends, Ben, was dragged into the darkness, his screams echoing through the night. The rest of us, paralyzed by fear, could only watch helplessly as he was devoured by the creature. The horror of the moment was etched into our souls, a wound that would never heal. Determined to avenge our fallen friend, we pressed on, our hearts filled with a mixture of fear and rage. The forest seemed to close in around us, the trees forming a menacing barrier. The creature, sensing our resolve, emerged from the shadows, its form grotesque and terrifying. A battle ensued, a desperate struggle for survival. We fought with a ferocity born of desperation, our weapons flashing in the darkness. But the creature was too powerful, too relentless. One by one, we fell, our bodies succumbing to its savage attacks. As I lay dying, I could only watch in horror as the creature turned its attention to Sam, the last remaining survivor. She fought valiantly, but it was futile. The creature, with a final brutal strike, claimed its last victim. The forest, once a place of beauty and wonder, had become a graveyard, a silent testament to the horrors that lurked within its depths. The The wind howled, a mournful dirge for the souls we had lost, and as darkness enveloped me, I could only watch helplessly on the ground. The creature's final blow caught me off guard. A sharp pain lanced through my side as I crumpled to the forest floor. I lay there, my vision blurring, my breath shallow. The creature loomed over me, its eyes glowing with a sinister light. I closed my eyes, resigned to my fate, but then something unexpected happened. A sudden shift in the wind, a gust of icy air, distracted the creature. It turned its head, its attention diverted. Seizing the opportunity, I mustered every ounce of strength I had left and rolled away, disappearing into the undergrowth. I lay there, panting, my body aching. The creature searched for me, its roars echoing through the forest. But I remained hidden, my breath held, my heart pounding. As the creature's roars grew fainter, I knew my chance had come. I crawled out of the undergrowth and stumbled towards the cabin, my body weak and trembling. Reaching the cabin, I collapsed onto the floor, my body racked with pain. I was injured, but I was alive. I had cheated death, but at a terrible cost. My friends were gone, their lives extinguished by the creature's wrath. As I recovered from my wounds, I began to piece together the events of that fateful night. I realized that the creature was not a mere beast, but something far more sinister, a creature of darkness with a hunger for human flesh. It was a creature born of ancient evil, a relic of a time when darkness reigned supreme. I knew I had to warn others, to share my story, to prevent others from falling victim to the creature's terror. But I also knew that I could not simply tell my story. I had to prove it, to show the world the horrors that lurked in the woods. I couldn't return to the forest as I was scared to my bones. The only option I had was to sought out the authorities, but they dismissed my claims as the ravings of a madman. They refused to believe my story, to accept the truth. I was alone, a lone voice crying out in the wilderness. The families of my friends, consumed by grief and anger, blamed me for their deaths. They saw me as a coward, a survivor who had abandoned his friends in their hour of need. Their accusations, though unjust, cut deep, a constant reminder of the tragedy that had unfolded. And the worst part? The bodies of my friends were never found. They vanished without a trace, leaving behind only a trail of blood and terror. The truth, however, was far more horrifying. They had been consumed by the creature, their bodies reduced to mere bones, scattered across the forest floor. The creature, in its insatiable hunger, had erased all traces of their existence. I still live with the guilt of their death till date. If you were in my shoes, what would you have done differently? Let me know in the comments section. Far away in a village, the sun hung low in the sky, casting long, grasping shadows on the forest floor as the group of hikers set out for what was meant to be an adventurous afternoon. 4 friends, Mark, Eliza, Lucas, and Danielle, laughed and joked, their voices carrying through the dense thicket, masking the forest's ancient secrets. None of them noticed the subtle shift in the air when Mark, confident in his sense of direction, led them onto a path they'd never seen before. "This way," he called out, pointing to a narrow, winding trail that twisted deeper into the woods. It seemed almost too perfect, lined by trees that stood like sentinels with branches curling overhead. But the silence between the trees was unnatural, a muted song that had never been sung. "Are you sure, Mark?" Eliza asked, a note of hesitation in her voice. Mark waved her off with a grin. "Trust me," he said, stepping further into the unknown. The group followed, their footsteps breaking through layers of dried leaves and twigs, each crackle and echo in the suffocating quiet. Time seemed to stretch, and as the minutes passed, the path under their feet grew stranger. What began as a dirt trail transformed, the soil turning dark, almost black, as if tainted by something long forgotten. A shiver ran down Danielle's spine. "Does anyone else feel like we've been walking in circles?" she asked, glancing over her shoulder as if expecting eyes to peer back from the shadows. But there was nothing, only the dense, suffocating green that had swallowed them whole. Lucas checked his watch and frowned. The hands were frozen, stuck in a position that defied the passing moments. "That's weird," he muttered. The air felt heavy, damp, and thick enough to touch. Suddenly the sky above them dimmed, darkening without warning, as though a cloud had swallowed the sun whole. The group exchanged worried glances. Nightfall should have been hours away. "We need to go back," Eliza said firmly, panic bubbling at the edges of her voice. But when they turned, the path behind them had changed. It no longer led to the entrance they'd come from, but instead branched off into countless dark corridors that seemed to wind endlessly, each one lined with trees whose bark writhed as if alive. Mark stepped forward, eyes wide, heart hammering. This can't be real," he whispered. Yet it was. The forest had shifted, the landscape bending and twisting as if reality itself was being rewritten before their eyes. And then, a sound, a distant laugh, like an echo carried by the wind. But it wasn't joyous. It was low, guttural, and mocking. It was followed by another noise, a rustling that sent shockwaves through their nerves. "Who's there?" Lucas shouted into the void, but his voice felt swallowed, as if the forest itself fed on their fear. They pressed forward, no longer sure which way they were going, only knowing that to stop was to surrender to whatever watched them from the shadows. Each step seemed to pull them deeper into a nightmare where time splintered and the world contorted. It wasn't long before they came upon a clearing, and that's when they saw it, figures partially hidden by the fog. But as they approached, their breath caught in their throats. The figures were themselves. Not reflections, not hallucinations, but twisted versions of their own beings. Eyes sunken, faces gaunt and pale, as if the forest had drained the life from them and left only the echoes behind. The doubles moved jerkily, like marionettes held by invisible strings. Danielle's doppelganger turned her head sharply, eyes locking onto her with an intensity that cut straight to her soul. It smirked, lips parting to reveal teeth stained crimson. "You shouldn't have come," it hissed, the voice a distorted mimicry of her own. Panic surged, and the group backed away, but the forest shifted around them, trees bending and coiling to form walls. Their only choice was forward, through the maze of their own worst fears. The forest roared around them, a cacophony of breaking branches and howling wind that made it hard to hear their own shouts. The twisted doppelgangers that had haunted their every move were now writhing on the ground, their bodies convulsing as if tethered to an unseen force. Mark's heart pounded as he stepped away from the shattered remains of the altar, its glow fading into the dark earth. Eliza stumbled, catching herself just in time before a gnarled root could trip her. Her chest heaved with labored breaths, eyes darting around for any sign that their nightmarish pursuers were still a threat. But the forest itself seemed frozen, poised on the edge of something unknown. "Is it over?" Lucas whispered, his voice thin and fragile, as though a louder sound might summon their tormentors back. Before anyone could answer, a deep rumble shook the ground beneath them. The clearing, once surrounded by walls of trees that loomed like judges, began to shift. The branches and roots retracted, moving with serpentine grace to reveal a narrow, barely visible path. A sliver of light, impossibly bright against the twilight of the forest, glimmered at its end. Danielle's eyes widened, tears of exhaustion and relief pooling as she pointed. "There! That has to be the way out!" Without hesitation they ran, pushing their bodies to their limits as the path unfurled before them like a living thing. The forest fought back, branches snapping at their legs, roots writhing underfoot. Eliza felt a sharp sting as a branch whipped across her cheek, drawing blood, but she ignored the pain, focusing on the growing light ahead. Behind them, the whispers resumed, low, guttural, and furious. The doppelgangers, now twisted beyond recognition with limbs elongated and faces disfigured, rose to their feet. They moved as one, chasing after the fleeing group with jerky, unnatural strides. The laughter that had haunted them now morphed into a shriek that pierced the air, making Mark's blood turn to ice. "Faster!" he yelled, the urgency in his voice cutting through their fatigue. The path grew steeper, the trees thinning until the light shone brighter. But just as hope surged in their hearts, the ground beneath them cracked open, a gaping chasm appearing as if the forest was making one final attempt to trap them. Lucas leapt over the gap, the edges crumbling under his boots as he landed with a stumble. He turned back, hands outstretched. "Come on!" Danielle was next, her heart pounding as she pushed off with all her strength, Lucas catching her and pulling her to safety. Eliza hesitated for just a second, glancing back to see the doppelgangers closing in, their hollow eyes fixed on her. Summoning every ounce of courage, she jumped, landing hard and rolling to her side as Lucas grabbed her arm. Only Mark remained, his doppelganger lunging forward, a hand with elongated fingers reaching out to drag him back into the forest's clutches. With a final roar of defiance, Mark leapt across the chasm just as the ground beneath him crumbled away, the creature's fingers brushing his boot before he landed on the other side. He tumbled forward, breathless and shaking. The light grew to a blinding intensity, and the forest screamed, a noise so full of rage and loss that it echoed deep within their bones. The ground shuddered one last time before a heavy silence fell over everything, so complete that it seemed as though sound itself had been erased. Then, as quickly as it had begun, the forest receded. The shadows melted away, the dense canopy above parted, and the golden hues of the late afternoon sun bathed them in warmth. They found themselves at the trailhead, the familiar parking lot visible in the distance, as if the nightmare had never been real. The group stood in stunned silence, glancing around with wide, disbelieving eyes. The path behind them, which had been a living maze moments before, was now an ordinary trail lined with tall, unmoving pines. There was no sign of the altar, the doppelgangers, or the suffocating presence that had hunted them. Eliza let out a choked sob, a laugh of relief mingled with disbelief. Danielle dropped to her knees, hands pressed against the cool earth as if to confirm it was solid and real. Mark looked at each of them, their faces streaked with dirt and tears but alive. "We made it," he whispered, the weight of what had just happened crashing down on him like a wave. Lucas clenched his fists, staring back at the now innocuous trail. "Let's not wait to find out if it's coming back," he said, his voice hoarse. Together, they turned their backs on the forgotten trail and walked toward the safety of the lot, leaving behind the whispers of a dimension that would haunt their dreams but never claim them. As they reached their car, a gust of wind rustled through the trees, carrying with it a faint, almost imperceptible sound, one last echo of laughter that lingered just long enough for them to hear, before fading back into silence. If this story's kept you at the edge of your seat, do not forget to hit the subscribe button for more thrilling stories like this. Thanks for watching, and see you next time.